My name is Matimba Nkuna. My background is in data science. I studied geomatics undergrad, a master's in computer science with a focus on NLP. These days I mainly focus on using data to build interesting products, ranging from using computer vision to build cashless stores, or using location AI and any range of sort of data-driven products. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Why do I do what I do? That's an interesting one. I have to say, and this sounds very cliche, but I am a very data-driven person. I use data in almost every aspect of my life. So even before this notion of data science, I guess we didn't have a title for it, but I've sort of been interested in sort of data and processing of data, and using some form of data-driven approach to think about life in general. To give a view, I track almost every aspect of my life, including having this conversation right now that will be logged somewhere as a data point. It feeds into a broader sort of signal that maps out my life. So why do I do what I do? It's because I like it. The notion of building as well, so the product aspect more and more is what I'm leaning towards, because the notion of building something from scratch is something that I identify with, and combining those worlds where, I've always been building some form of, whether it's digital or like within the physical world, and those things merge at some point. And now there's this data component, and using that knowledge along with the building component to put something together into what I guess we're calling products. It's an interesting journey. It's like watching a child grow and watching that mature into something that's quite beautiful. I guess I can't speak to one specific worst day on the job. I can tell you about, maybe this is something that people in the data science domain struggle with, is because it's such an infant career path, you're generally very lonely. And for those that came in early on, especially in South Africa, where there's not too much expertise, it means that you'd be seen as a subject matter expert very early on, and that what that looks like is a very lonely sort of technical journey. And some of the worst nights I guess I've heard are sort of trying to get that model over into some workable version for some deadline or some meeting. A lot of people have I'm guessing in this domain have experienced that, or just trying to get it over to a certain metric or some artificial way of measuring success for that, and the existential angst that comes with it, right? It's a very consequential field. The idea that when you explain it to someone older who doesn't understand machines and machine learning, to say, "Mom, I predict the future," it's a very daunting task. So the worst days have been spawned by some of this existential angst that comes with it, and I've seen it for other younger people coming in as well. It's interesting because I saw it as an opportunity to get work done. I didn't find the at the time I was working as a data scientist in a very sort of business environment, which didn't necessarily allow for too much sort of deep work zones where you could actually just get into the zone and just do the work. And I think I did some of my best technical work during that time. I delivered the most work I think I've ever delivered. Also probably maybe some of the most consequential work, which I can sort of still see in the market and things like that. So in that sense, it was good. From a technical working or deving perspective, it also, going back to that notion of existentialism, it allowed, because I think sometimes there's some form of shame that comes with constantly learning, whereas I guess at home, if you have your own sort of whiteboard and you can just spin up and actually just, go sort of do the basics again, that you might be ashamed to admit that, you have to go back to like first year calculus or something like that. In the office, you might feel a bit ashamed to bring that up, but it allowed for that kind of like, YouTube video on some, random thing that you forgot from a year or two ago and something like that. So it allowed quite a lot of that. From a personal perspective, I went through 2 phases. So there was the initial sort of view of just like go deep in the work, go as crazy, and the weekends were a blur. You'd be getting calls on weekends, something everyone complained about. It was a time when you forgot that you could actually switch off your machine. You switch off the machine to eat and to sleep, and for some time it seemed like you were in the zone. It was cool. But then at some point it just started to feel a bit dreadful, and I think that's when some of the pure existentialism that has nothing to do with work, has more to do with personality, started kicking in. And it was an interesting time. It was a consequential time. It made me aware that anything can change at any time. I'm someone who's always had that view. COVID almost caught me with my pants down, in the sense that it was, it's like you think you believe certain things, and then they happen, and it's like, whoa, I have not been preparing for this, So it's just one of those things that create some level of constant urgency in your head to say that at any given time anything can happen, especially for our generation. Being born in South Africa at the time I was born, just on sort of the dawn of democracy. It means that we haven't seen extreme conflict or extreme, instability, and that's very historically abnormal. So COVID, I guess, was the closest thing to sort of wide-scale instability that we saw, and it might be healthy that we saw that, because it creates some level of mindfulness and gratefulness about some of the things that we have. To grow up and to get to the age of 30 having not seen war, things like that. We saw a pandemic, and it sort of contextualizes where we are. Black man, a data scientist, wow, right? That's the 21st century for you. It's been a very great learning curve. It's always lovely to sort of see things come together. It's interesting, when you ask me what was the best day on the job, it was sort of this conflict between when I've built individual projects that have sort of seen the light of day and have been well received, but then and that level of recognition. But then I've realized more and more that last year, for instance, having worked on a particular project from scratch, or a product from scratch, and this product in which I haven't written any of the code actually, but sort of organizing people, whether from hiring, from structuring the teams, from drawing a product roadmap, from getting everyone in. Some of the people coming into their first job, a lot of the people coming into their first job, a lot of the seniors finding it very difficult to work with the juniors, and handling conflict, but effectively organizing people and actually launching that product. That was amazing. Like, that's an amazing feeling to actually see it come from some conversation, especially if it's in the context of people saying it can't be done. It's particularly, I guess, satisfying. But yeah, organizing people, and actually the day you get to launch it. And we went out with the team to launch on the day of the launch, and just sitting around the table, and just everyone knowing that they played a role in building this and having played my role in organizing that entire team, that was really satisfying, and that's something that I enjoy quite a bit. COVID, I can tell you the market has changed quite a bit. I'll speak in broader terms, I'll speak for myself. The market has changed quite a bit. I think that it has, to some degree, democratized the market. By the market, I'm referring specifically to tech, and by tech, I'm referring specifically to more our domain, not just restricted to data science or machine learning, software development, engineering, rather data engineering as well. It's opened up people to understand that their skills are transferable across borders. It's also, more than people, it's made companies aware of this. So there's a lot more opportunities abroad. There's been a trickle effect of that, which means that salaries have had to, adjust to match those new demands or those new trends. It means that a lot of companies that are baselining against very old methodologies cannot keep up. So there's been a lot of lost labor. It's the irony of South Africa that we suffer from some of the highest unemployment in the world, but our tech sector seems to have a scarcity issue, and more so. And I can say that it's an interesting conversation you have to have with yourself when you want to justify staying in the country when all the offers are coming. But more and more it's becoming a reality that you can with some of the Silicon Valley offers or European offers. I hope for 2023, I guess in general, not just for the year, but for the continent and for governments to double down on investment into the education of the young within these domains, especially because someone in the first grade right now, right, they'll live in a very different world to the one we live in today, right? By the time they're 15, 16, the world would have changed very, very drastically. And if we're still using old educational structures, it will hamper us. But also I think it's an opportunity for the continent, being where we are relative to the rest of the world. This would have been a very strategic. We've seen some countries as well. You've seen Estonia. Some countries on the continent like Rwanda have done well to make those investments. But the idea is that if we, from an educational perspective,